Hello and welcome to today's webinar. I'm Audrey Lewis, Marketing Specialist at Telium, and I'll be your moderator. Before we get started, I'd like to go over a few housekeeping items. This webinar will last approximately 45 minutes with time for a Q&A at the end. With that said, please remember to submit your questions so we can answer them live. For any questions that we aren't able to answer, we'll follow up with you after. Lastly, we have some related resources available for you in the attachments and links section of the platform, so please feel free to engage with them at any point. And now on to today's presenters. David Raab is founder and CEO of the Customer Data Platform Institute, a vendor-neutral organization with over 10,000 members, which educates marketers and technologists about customer data management. David named the Customer Data Platform category in 2013. He has a long history as an independent consultant helping marketers to understand, find, and deploy marketing technologies and vendors. His clients include Global 2000 firms in retail, financial services, telecommunications, publishing, technology, and other industries. He began his career as a marketer in publishing and continuities. Alan Rogers works at Telium as a customer success architect. Alan has been making web pages since 1997. Alan has spent the last decade working as a solutions consultant for Adobe, where he got a diverse look at how companies are trying to gather and leverage their data. Alan lives in Las Vegas and works for Caesars Entertainment as a MarTech practitioner prior to his time as a solutions consultant. Ted Spikas is the Americas RVP of Telium's Solutions Consultants. He has 20 years of experience in engineering, architecture, digital marketing, social, SaaS, telephony, ITSM, lean IT, and automated quality assurance technologies. Prior to joining Telium, Ted worked in a number of senior-level advisory positions for Computer Associates and Hewlett-Packard, where his focus was centered on building centers of excellence within the financial, healthcare, technology, and retail industries. And lastly, Matt Parisi is the Director of Product Marketing at Telium. He has over 10 years of strategic marketing experience across both traditional and digital marketing channels. His experience spans industries, working both at consultancies and client side. And with that, let's go ahead and get started. Matt, over to you.
Thank you very much, Audrey, and very excited to be here. Thank you, everyone, for joining. I'm going to put our faces on the screen here so you can see us as we go through. Today, we're gonna kick things off with a quick introduction from David to kind of set the scene for, what are we talking about when we're talking about build or buy a customer data platform? It's not such a straightforward question on exactly what a customer data platform is. So we'll want to kind of define the space or the solution that we're trying to talk about here. And then we'll go through some questions where ultimately we'll discuss, the deciding factors to consider when trying to determine whether you should build or buy given your own organization's unique state. And then we'll talk about some questions around how you make that decision. If you do have questions as we talk, please throw those in the question box, and we will try to answer those live in the course of our discussion. So with that, why don't I kick things over to David? And David, can you let us know exactly what is a customer data platform and how should we think about one?
Thanks, Matt. Funny you should ask. It's my favorite question. Spent the last several years helping people to answer it. So the simple answer as to what a CDP is this thing that sits in between your source data systems, which are your operational systems that are producing customer data, and your delivery systems that are using customer data. And what happens in between, if you want it in 3 words, it's CDPs build profiles. That's really all you ever have to remember about CDPs, is that they build profiles. But since some people want more than 3 words, we'll explain a little more in detail what they do. So what happens is the CDPs, as they say, they connect to your systems that are interacting with customers or getting external data from third parties or otherwise collecting some information about your customers. They then are going to load it in and clean it and transform it so that it's more usable and consistent, and then link the data together that belongs to each customer. So you get a complete view or a unified view of that customer into a profile. Maybe do some aggregation, so calculate something like lifetime value or maybe a model score based on the combined data, then expose that data so it's shareable with other systems. And also all CDPs have a segmentation capability so they can pull out groups of customers to be used as, say, an email audience or an advertising audience or for analysis purposes. And then, of course, they push that data out or they share that data with the various systems they're going to use it or activate it. So that's your CRM, your website, your mobile app, whatever, your DMP, and so on. So that's, at the very high level, what a CDP does. Now, if you want to get a little more into reality, those of you who insist on dealing with reality, there are actually things in between building the profiles and delivering the messages. There are a whole bunch of analytical capabilities that happen, like predictive modeling and recommendation engines and classifications and optimization and so on. And then there also are these message selection capabilities, which we've labeled campaign here, that are actually picking which message goes to which person, not just which segment you belong to, but actually choosing different messages for different people within a given segment. And that's where all of your personalization and your outbound lists and your real-time interaction lists and your cross-channel and cross-campaign orchestration happens and arbitration happens. So again, there's a bunch of activities that happen in between simply building the profiles and delivering the messages. Now, in terms of what the CDP does, you'll see that each of these things here are a point solution. Some people think, oh, a CRM is a CDP, or a predictive modeling is a CDP, or a CDP is an orchestration engine, or a CDP is the same thing as a DMP. Well, none of those are CDPs. All right, they are not designed specifically to build customer profiles. They're designed for other purposes. They may indeed build something that looks like a profile. Usually, though, it's a subset of the full customer data set. It's just the data that they've often generated internally, like a CRM. CRM basically work with data that's within a CRM that was created within the CRM. They don't import data typically, or a web personalization system or such. So those are point solutions. The CDP, though, is that thing in this blue box that pulls all these things together. And then to make things really entertaining, some CDPs do more. But so let's just step back, though, before we talk about what else CDPs do, clarify just a bit the distinction between CDPs and other systems that also manage customer data, which as a result are often confused with CDPs. So we have our data lake and our data warehouse. Those are not packaged software. The formal definition of CDP is packaged software that builds a persistent unified customer database accessible to other systems. That's the actual literal CDP Institute definition. So CDP is packaged software. You buy it, you don't build it. You build a data lake, you build a data warehouse. Those are custom projects. CDPs are persistent. They store the data somewhere outside of the other systems. They pull it in and they store it, as you just saw in that diagram. Well, data hubs, tag managers, integration platforms, those kinds of systems, they don't store data. They just move it from one place to another place. So they can unify processes across systems. But because they don't store it, there are things like tracking a customer's identity over time that are really difficult if you don't store the data, because the data in that source system may go away. Why would the delivery system care about my old address? They just want my current address. So if you want to link that old address to a new address, the delivery system might not necessarily have maintained it, or if it stored it somewhere, it could be often some place where it's not easily accessible. CRM, marketing automation, marketing cloud systems, all those systems, they are packaged software, but again, they are usually limited in the data sources. They usually work with the data that they've created themselves. They're not really designed to import the data. They're not generally designed to store all the details. They keep a subset of the data. So there are a number of ways that they don't really meet our definition of a CDP. Data management platforms, DMPs, again, most often confused with CDPs. They are packaged, but they take a limited amount of data. They're really designed to store cookies more than anything else. With cookies, you don't keep a cookie for more than 30, 60, 90 days. So they're truly persistent, even though they technically do persist the data, but they don't store it for that long. So you don't get the years-long view of the customer in a DMP. And they don't keep all the details either, because DMPs are designed to create audiences really quickly with lots and lots of data. The way you do that is you design it in a certain way that requires you to pre-aggregate or summarize the details. So you lose some detail. when you load data into a DMP. Email, CMS, all the other customer-facing systems, websites, mobile apps, again, usually packaged, so some people build their own, but they're very limited in the sources. They work mostly with their own data. So we have all these other systems that could be confused with the CDP because they all store customer data. Not just could be, but sometimes are, or sometimes are proposed. We have a CRM. Why would we need a CDP? Well, your CRM is designed to do what CRMs are good at, which is putting records in front of call center agents or salespeople, one record at a time. But they're not designed to do what a CDP does, which is to work with all that data at once. So now that we've finished that up, every system is optimized for its purpose. Be really clear about that. They're all good at what they do. But to be good at what they do, they had to be designed or optimized in a certain way. And you make trade-offs when you design. When you optimize for one thing, you get less good at something else. So only the CDP is the system that's optimized to create those complete shareable customer profiles. That's why you would need a CDP, even if you had all those other great systems. Now, again, CDPs build profiles. That's the core thing that CDPs do. But some CDPs do more than build profiles. Here's another version of that same diagram. The CDPs that just build profiles, we call data CDPs because they assemble data. And again, that's all you need to be a CDP. But there are some that have analytical capabilities in addition. There are some that have analytical and campaign capabilities. As you can see, we have a very clever naming system here. There are some that include delivery functionality. There are even some who include operational. So an operational CDP might be an e-commerce system. E-commerce is an operational function that also has a CDP inside, because we talk about CDP inside when we get down to these large systems that do a whole bunch of things, one of which is CDP. So that's what CDPs do, and that's how they kind of fit into the grand scheme of things. That's why it's so confusing, because even though they all do the data bit, some of them do more, some of them do much more. And so when somebody looks at the CDP category and says there's 150 of these things, they're all totally different from each other. How this doesn't make any sense. Well, they're not all totally different because they all share that profile building, that data column in this diagram here, capability. That's what's the same. Then the other stuff is optional. So hopefully that makes clear that what kind of CDP you need depends on what other systems you have. If I have great analytical systems or great personalization systems or great delivery systems or great operational systems, I don't need a CDP that has those capabilities. If I don't have those and I want to have it all in one place, which is certainly a nice thing, then I might buy a CDP that has that scope. So you can pick whatever scope of function you need based on what it is you're trying to do and what it is more or less that you can't do that you want to be able to accomplish. So I think that's an overview, hopefully a good overview. I'll let you be the judge of that, of what CDPs are and what they do. If you take one thing away, CDPs build profiles. Everything else is gravy. Let's go to the panel.
Awesome. Thank you, David. That was an important point to make, I think. When we're talking about build or buy CDP, we ultimately need to know, what is a CDP? Like, what is the scope of that? And as David just went through, I think everybody can see that's not necessarily the most straightforward answer, which means it's interesting to think about the various scenarios that someone might be going through when they enter, this kind of decision. So I'm wondering, and I think we can do a little round robin on the panel here. All of you have an interesting difference in your roles and your experience. Obviously, David running the CDP Institute, you've kind of got like a really broad bird's eye view on this topic. Alan working at various companies and ultimately Adobe just most recently before coming over to Telium. You've got a different perspective. And then Ted, you're kind of the grizzled Telium veteran in the room here. So I think each one of you is going to have an interesting answer. Why don't we start with Ted?
Yeah, at a high level, I mean, the notion of build versus buy is a really interesting one, because it's going to be different for everyone else, and how they look at their organization and understand what their skills are. I think the theme of setting up a new center of excellence for data is at the forefront and the foundation of this question. And then after that, falling downwards from understanding the process and the people first, then you can take a look at your internal capabilities and see what are the main features and functions of a CDP that you choose to build versus buy. And I think in my experience in the last 6 going on 7 years with Telium, the real flashpoints for purchasing a CDP functionality, as David put it, the data first one is, the concept of identity management. Having the ability to resolve identity is core to that. What really struck me when David pointed out the differences between other systems, for example, the DMP, we get confused. We take a look at identity from the lens of a marketing acquisition campaign, where primarily, contextual advertising is king. You don't need to know the deep down PII data from that. You're doing cohort-based analysis with that tool. So there is some confusion there. So the identity graph or the identity resolution capabilities are, in my opinion, the most valuable aspect of a CDP that once you understand what you're looking for, that becomes a very difficult thing to build. I've spoken with many of our customers at Telium who did try to build that in the past, and they described a years-long process worth 7 digits over a span of years, and it's still not fixed. It's always changing. It's always evolving. It's something you want to outsource to a vendor. So I'll kick off things by pointing out that core one and stealing probably Alan's thunder on that.
Why don't we go to Alan? What are your thoughts on kind of how people come into this decision and ultimately start this process?
So it really depends on what kind of an organization you have. If you have a really big IT organization, you have a lot of developers on your team, you've probably been frustrated by the lack of a lot of these CDP capabilities, and you've been building them on your own. That's why a lot of people built data warehouse and data lakes to bring all this data together. And I think a lot of companies have done some backbreaking work to resolve identity, to resolve sessions, to normalize all this data and bring it together. And so it's kind of hard when you've spent all this time and energy bringing this data together. And what I've noticed is a lot of these companies have brought the data together, but then it's really hard to actually take action on it. It's really, really difficult to get all the data together. You might even be able to create a segment and do some stuff with SQL queries, but then it's like, okay, I've got this segment. Now what are we going to do? And that's usually the crunchy part that a lot of people kind of fall apart with. So I think there's a lot of interesting things happening. A lot of companies out there have pulled their data together, have done a lot of the identity resolution, and then they don't want to waste all that effort and then just go buy a CDP off the shelf. And so that's kind of what I see, and that's where I see people making this decision. It's usually the people also with like a lot of developers on the team who have the time. Oh, you're on mute, Matt.
And for David, when people come into this decision, you've seen them come in from many different ways and angles. Just tracking, I know that there's over 100 CDPs that you're tracking, or companies that call themselves a CDP, and I'm wondering, how is this topic generally come up? Is it always about one particular thing they're solving for, or is it kind of this grab bag of various considerations? Because I think it's important that when you come into this, it's really important to kind of set your scope of what decision you're actually making.
Right. Well, yeah. As someone who spent years in consulting, of course, I have to say it depends, right? So there's not one key thing that everybody does the same, but they do tend, like any project, to have a pain point that they're trying to solve for, and often that pain point has something to do with moving data from one system to another. That's when you come right down to what CDPs are really good at, and pretty much every core CDP use case that we see has to do with, I have data in system A that I really need for system B or process B, and I can't get to it because it's siloed. I have to say silos at least 3 times in this, or we don't get paid. So that's what the CDP does, is it pulls that data together and makes it available. But what the specific thing is, do I want to combine my e-commerce data with my point of sale data? Do I want to take the full profile and share it with the CRM system, which only has a partial view of the data? Do I want to update my retargeting lists based on what somebody just did on the web. The particular things that they do are going to vary, and depending on what systems people have and what capabilities and what industry they're in and so on. But there is that sort of core underlying thing that says, if this is my problem, then the CDP is probably the solution.
Perfect. So I think the important part to think about here is exactly kind of the value you're trying to create, and ultimately what systems are involved in that. And David, for Alan, have you seen? There's obviously, when people come into this decision, they're not coming in with zero technology. You're not coming into it with a fresh slate, per se. So, do you have any advice around kind of the approach someone should take when they're deciding, like, exactly scoping out that build?
Well, yeah, again, it's about looking. It's a lot of companies. It's shocking how many companies have not done this with their MarTech technology, but go into a room and whiteboard this and figure out what the products that you already have, what capabilities they have, and where those gaps are, right? Now, a lot of people, most CDPs are going to have a bit, if you look at a Venn diagram, CDPs are going to have a bit of an overlap on some of these other tools as well, right? And so really, a CDP is all about creating that profile, being able to segment it and action off of it. So I think that if you look at the value of the CDP, it's usually around, first of all, gathering all that data into one single location, getting that 360-degree view of the customer. The question is, what's the value of that to you? How important is it to be able to understand a multi-channel, flow of a user and understand that where they are in that journey, apart from just the digital? Because I think that more and more what we're trying to do is bring in the real life, the brick and mortar stuff and the digital stuff, bring it all together and understand a holistic view of what a customer is doing. So the value of that is huge, but also the value of actually actioning on that data is massive, massive, massive. So the question is like, okay, which channels are you trying to activate this on? And how hard is it going to be to take this data warehouse data or this data lake data and actually be able to implement it and action it in every channel? Because each channel has its own rules around what data you can pass. It has its own APIs. And the question is like, how many of these endpoints do we have, and how many resources do we have to keep up with these? Because the technology for these endpoints, for these integrations, changes over time. So it's not, everybody gets really excited about developing something and building something new, right? But it's way, way less fun to manage it over the long term and do change management and upgrades and things like that. So I think really, sometimes if you've got one source of data and one destination, a CDP might be overkill for you. But if you've got 3 or 4 destinations and they're changing and they're complicated, then it might, the value of purchasing a CDP that can manage those integrations for you is huge.
Yeah, the kind of the overtime consideration kind of sometimes isn't the first consideration when you go into buy or building it, which should be a big thought, right? Because do you want to be in the maintenance game of keeping up with third party changes? Is that something that you're equipped for? To the point earlier that we made and Ted made around kind of who's on your team. So David, you've just tracking so many different CDPs, ultimately some CDPs having even campaign and operational functionality, and some CDPs being very focused on having really deep data capabilities. You've probably seen people kind of go all directions, on this decision. Is there anything, that would either line up with Alan's experience that you would spotlight, or anything that you would caution people against around, kind of how to scope out what you're building, like whether you're going to go really broad and wide or focus on one, kind of little use case that you're trying to solve?
Well, use cases are absolutely critical. And the thing about use cases is that any marketing team that earns its paycheck could sit in a boardroom and whiteboard dozens of cases. Marketers are really good at that, and it's not just marketers; other kinds of users as well, because CDPs are not just for marketers anymore. So you have to be kind of selective in the use cases that you focus on, because the use cases are going to drive your requirements that you're using when you actually go out and select a CDP, or if you're going to choose to build your own. Doesn't matter either way. You need requirements. So you have to select not just the simplest use cases, because that's one of the things that people do. They say, well, if I could just get even these few things, I'd be so happy. And then they get those few things, and guess what? Now they want to do something else. And if they only designed it around those few things or only picked the product based on whether it could do the few relatively simple things, now they sort of run out of steam. And if it's a product that they bought and that's all the product can do, well, now they kind of got to get a new product. If it's something that they built and they finished the project and by some miracle was like on time and on schedule and on budget, now they finally have to, make modifications to it, which the IT department sometimes gets kind of cranky about, or they don't get cranky. They say, yeah, we'll put it in our backlog and, call me in 2 years. So you really have to make sure that you're looking beyond the first set of kind of basic requirements to some of the more advanced things that you might need to do, that you're ultimately going to need to do as well. Now, the good news, because there is some good news, is that once you start looking at the advanced use cases, the requirements tend to be very similar. So yeah, I need real-time interfaces with my delivery systems, which is not a basic use case. That's a relatively advanced thing. But once you realize you need that for use case number 7, say, 8, 9, 10, 11, 12, also you need the same one. So you don't get that many incremental requirements once you get a few of the more advanced use cases in there. So you don't have to go crazy. You don't have to spec out 200 use cases, but you do have to make sure the ones you do spec out are of substantial variety, and at least some of them are fairly sophisticated.
Okay, that makes sense, and that's also another point for making sure you're considering the overtime, because like you said, when you go into it and it works, you might be hungry for more. So it's probably a good thing to plan on. So Ted, that's a kind of I'm going to ask the next 2 questions in one here. Kind of leads to the cost question. So, if you're going into it with one thing and then it kind of slowly scope creeps over time to become something bigger, that seems like it might have an impact on how you budget, overall. And, what is the best combination of kind of building and buying that's going to, create the right balance for you based on the values you're looking for. So are there any hidden costs or things that people miss when they, misjudge when they go into this, and any ways to kind of, make sure you don't find yourself in a situation where you've built something that's not serving the needs and you still need to keep going and sinking money into it?
Yeah, absolutely. It's such a fantastic question, because it's the big problem of the industry, but it's also the compelling reason why people love the CDP space. When you think about the use cases that David just mentioned, those are things that we create in the business. The brand creates the use cases that drive the revenue, and that causes us to build things, to buy things. But we can't forget about the scenarios surrounding that also impact us. The big date in my mind that I'll never forget is on May 25th in 2018, when we all woke up to the new privacy regulations that were going to take the world by storm. This imposed a use case upon brands. Shortly before then, Apple began ITP, and Google Chrome is soon to follow suit, as we've heard in a year. So now new browser restrictions that are voluntarily enforced by some of the walled gardens and the biggest players on our stack add another use case or a meaning to address this problem. And the CDP essentially emerges from that. It gives you data as a service, and it allows you to have consuming technologies go to a central place, not only to make a personalization use case manifest itself and drive revenue for the company. That was a nice to have in 2015. And now it's a must have. We must have a central hub of data that focuses only on the data, reconciles it in real time, complies with the privacy mandates, complies and supersedes, future-proofs itself for the browser restrictions, and then also, yes, delivers on the use cases for the business. I simply can't see this. I don't see it as a practical approach to delivering build solutions every time one of these changes. Case in point, Facebook, this wonderful new server-side streaming API that is meant to address the 150% CPA increase that our brands are now experiencing. If they don't use server-side, the pixel's not going to be working for them much longer. So we're putting this into place. That API has changed about 4 times in the last 6 months. I don't think brands want to be in the business of hiring IT staff just for that one brand. It's a wonderful use case. There's a lot of value to it. That's something that should be bought. That's something that should be placed into a self-service interface so we can point and click our way through this issue of data acquisition, and then we can spend our time as specialists on the Facebook side of things and start segmenting properly and delivering our content and understanding our segmentation from there. Data should be automated. It should be governed through a central approach to address all of those things, all of those factors on the outside.
Cool. So which leads me to kind of hone in on this a little bit more. For David, are there any different functional areas where a bought CDP is maybe better positioned to deliver value than building it? So like as people are thinking about what to build and what to buy, are there certain things that a CDP is better equipped for to deliver value for a customer?
Well, certainly the maintenance of the connectors is probably far number one on that list, because that is a huge nightmare. And they change all the time, and you know, it's just a total resource sink for an organization. It just really, you know, it just does not make sense to not outsource that. Identity resolution actually is another area that's super complicated, that many organizations, the majority of IT organizations, don't have a lot of skills in that area. It's simply not something they've had to do. Also, the thing about identity resolution is often you want third-party data to provide some of the connections that you don't have available within your own data between two different identifiers, because you just don't happen to see them in the course of business. So for both of those reasons, identity resolution is another big area that it makes total sense to outsource. And you know, there are other ones, data quality. There's a bunch of things that, you know, if it's a common problem, if it's complicated and that a lot of companies have to do basically the same thing, that's where you really are better off buying it than building it. You know, the other side of that is if it's something that is unique to your company or possibly to your industry that you can't buy it, that's where you might want to have to build it.
That's a really good point. Focusing your development dollars on things that are unique to your business makes a lot of sense strategically. So similar question to you, Alan, just in your experience with customer experience architectures, are there certain functionalities that a CDP is really well positioned to provide? Oh, you're muted. Oh, still. There you go.
So the CDP, you know, we think about the ingest process, and even 5 years ago, ingesting data from multiple data sources was easier, I think, than it is now. There's more and more regulations. Ted was talking about browsers are changing, all this stuff is changing around the gathering of data. So gathering data, if you really, really have like a great system right now, I mean, I guess you could build that on your own. The management portion of it, I think it'd be it'd be very, very difficult to go outside of the CDP space and create all the different management rules regarding where data can be used, who has access to the data, where it's obfuscated and where it's not, you know, all those kind of things. That's difficult. And then the publishing, again, what David said around all the connectors, that's a big deal. Now, I do think, though, is that I think it'd be the companies need to start thinking about how they're going to feed a CDP and what magic sauce they can add to that. So, for instance, a lot of companies have taken all their data and put it into a data lake, and they have their data scientists go and make inquiries and run some very interesting models against that data that they want to actually take advantage of. So think about this, you know, the tools that you've already been building for yourselves, the tools that you'd like to, or you know, that are unique to your company. Think about ways that you can push them into a CDP rather than building your own CDP. So I think that you know, that's an important distinction to make. You know, you can leverage all these investments you've made in doing all these, you know, all these amazing things with your data. You can actually make it, you can accelerate the investment through a CDP by consuming the outputs of that data and then making them actually usable, you know, in the different channels.
Cool. And we had one question come in. I think Ted, if you could answer this one for us, is some custom development needed to support the execution and implementation of COTS CDP systems? So if you might be able to define COTS CDP systems for us and then answer the question. Oh, muted. There you go.
Commercial off the shelf, absolutely. That's what we do. I can speak on behalf of Telium because of become intimately familiar with precisely what the custom configuration and development needs are when our particular CDP is purchased. We try to tackle the hardest parts of that custom development and put it in a self-service GUI. And the hardest part, to David's point, yes, it's also the connectors and the ingestion technologies that need to be built. We productize those, and we tackle that problem first and foremost. It's a big differentiator for us, and many of our competitors have wonderful technology there too. The other thing that we think is probably the hardest thing that you're going to want to address that will involve custom development if you don't purchase it is the orchestrated interaction in real time between the CDP and the touch points that fuel it. So if you're not interacting with your touch points, you're just a database. So you're just another database. But if you have the ability to move that profile down to the device, over to the CRM in real time, based on interactions, now you're in business. Now you can trigger personalization campaigns, and you can Venn diagram every single technology in your ecosystem and chop off that data orchestration development need across the board. So the answer is yes, if you don't purchase a CDP that has the ability to transit that data in real time to the touch points, you're going to have to build that yourself, and you're going to have to tackle it one by one. It'll change every 6 months. You have to do it over and over again. And that's one of the things that we at Telium espouse as being one of the main reasons that you're going to purchase this. And there's tremendous amount of value in there. Just add the cost, the time, and then ultimately the risk that you're enduring by taking on this task yourself and being late to market with some of your personalization strategies. You also become fairly rigid as an organization if you're constantly configuring the same applications to transit in real time between each other. You want to remain agnostic. So peel off that data governance custom development piece by buying a CDP, and peel it off all of the technologies that get involved. Don't just be satisfied with buying a CDP and going, great, I've got a customer profile. Think bigger. Take away those data governance custom development tasks from every technology in the organization and all of the touch points that fuel customer data to your brand.
Cool. We had one other question come in, David. I'm gonna send this one to you. What sort of expertise is required to implement a CDP system in a complex company that has multi lines of business, multi regions? If you could kind of go through the role descriptions that you should kind of have on your radar to answer this question.
Well, it's complicated. And I'll key off the word implement as opposed to develop, just to narrow the scope a little, because we're not talking about development. But you need somebody who's going to be, well, certainly just in charge of the project and that kind of thing. But specifically, you really need expertise in where your company data sits. So you know what systems to pull the data from and what shape that data is. You need a collection of data governance and data quality capabilities, because that's the number one problem is the source data is not what it should be anyhow. So you need that. There's a certain amount of architecture required, even with the COTS, commercial off the shelf. CDP, I haven't heard that term in years, so whoever asked it, good to know you're still working. Not retired yet. At least you didn't know those terms. Maybe they're young people, I don't know. People who can configure, and because even though CDPs are very flexible, you still have to design the database right for a particular set of requirements. And then of course you need all the expertise in actually taking advantage of the data. That's the other big barrier that we hear people telling us is, hey, we buy a CDP, we don't really know what to do with it or how to use it. We don't have the skills to take advantage of all the possibilities, all the personalization things we could do. We don't really know what to do with them. So there's a whole bunch of skills in marketing, campaign development, and then in analytics to support that. So there are, in fact, quite a few roles that are involved in making it happen.
I would like to add one more too. I think that the privacy and regulation people, that getting your legal department involved early is super important, because this data, implementing a CDP is going to bring together people in a way that probably no other technology has. You're going to have to get all the different channels, all those silo channels are going to have to be sitting in the same room and say, hey, what does this data want to look like? How do we create segments and things like that? But I do think that a lot of people ignore the very unsexy part of like making sure we're in compliance and that we're dealing with the legal things correctly. So I found that having legal involved up front is super important.
Absolutely.
Yeah, that's a good point. And I would be remiss not to ask for your input as well, because I know you love the center of excellence approach that you were already talking about earlier. So anything that you'd add to those answers?
Yeah, I think they've really nailed it. I mean, when you've got when you're centralized, especially for multi lines of businesses globally, Telium has many customers that fit this model, and the way we approach them is far different than domestic brands, because you can't scale unless you understand the privacy regulations from region to region, implement that. There's architectural issues involved with that too. Where does the data go? Can you bring it to the United States versus Germany, et cetera, versus Japan? We deal with that all the time. And the CDP, again, if it's focused on simply data and the orchestration of data, that includes data at rest as well as data in motion, which I discussed in the last answer I gave. So data at rest is a big issue. So it's not only the legal staff who decide what data you can collect and what data you should throw out and never let into the organization to begin with. Legal will help with that. You're going to need architects, just like Alan is for us. We structure our customer success team over here at Telium to have customer success architects that understand these requirements and can design them, particularly for our global brands. Beyond that, we then offer digital strategy, customer success managers. So these CSMs understand the latest and greatest use cases, how to design them and configure them in the CDP, and push play on that, and then start to automate it. Beyond those two, those are the most important things. Translating that over to the brand, you're likely going to have a chief data officer. The rise of the CDO has been more prominent in the last 2 years. This is the ideal solution for the CDO to own in the center of excellence and to staff. The CDO doesn't have to understand digital marketing, ad tech, the 7,000 different technologies in that Lumascape. The CDO understands data and he understands how to orchestrate it. So these are the things that I think those roles will be especially critical in a global arena, because you're going to have the requirements completely different compared to which region you're in.
Great. So I think we answered that question. So let's move on to kind of our closing out our webinar here. We've made it to the end. Thank you everyone for hanging in there with us for 40 minutes so far. So the last question we have is just around takeaways. So is there anything that we missed in this decision? Are there anything that you would really go back to and highlight for people who are approaching this decision? And let's start with Alan.
So my key takeaway is take advantage of all the work you've already done. You don't have to throw it away. A CDP should sit alongside all of the work you've done and be able to consume that work and then make it actionable more quickly. At the very end of the day, when does it make sense to build your own CDP? I would say it probably doesn't. and that a lot of these tools, there's a lot of different CDPs out there that can probably meet your needs. Finding the right one and integrating into your system is probably going to be a better use of your time than actually creating the UIs and creating all these things and maintaining them in the long term.
And Ted, what are your takeaways?
Biggest thing, if people walk out of the room, to remember is that you don't have to buy a CDP to get started on the strategy of what a CDP offers. You can sit down today and make a blueprint of your data needs, data on devices, data in profiles, data in transit and at rest. Understand that blueprint. Buying a CDP simply makes that blueprint actionable and portable and transmissible to all touch points and to all end destinations. That's all you're doing with the CDP. So don't wait until the CDP is purchased. Understand that. Build your data strategy today, and then you'll understand how complex and how sophisticated your needs are, and you'll be able to make the right choice as to what CDP you want after you do that. Come prepared to engage with vendors that sell CDPs and dictate what should be the important parts. It isn't just making an email shoot faster. It isn't just interfacing with Facebook. It's much more than that, and it starts by understanding your data strategy and codifying it.
I think we lost.
No, I think we lost Matt himself.
Oh no!
What will we do without him?
Now
David, I
we
think
can talk
Well,
about him behind his back.
David, why don't you go ahead and close us off
Yes, I
with your
think I was
takeaway?
up.
I'll put on the Matt hat.
There you go. Well, I think that if there's one piece of advice, if you're facing that build versus buy decision, it's to be realistic about the scope, because that's the mistake that people make. Oh, this looks so simple. It's just a database. Well, it's not just a database. There's so much else that goes on, and it's really easy to underestimate the complexity of what needs to be done. So you want to work cooperatively with your IT people, who are, if anyone's going to, be an advocate for building, it's going to be them. And you simply need to jointly make clear all the things that are necessary. And in many cases, they will look at that and say, I got better ways to spend my time. This is a really big project. If I can buy it, I'll buy it. And then I'll just add in what I want to do. And the other thing, again, is they're going to be involved anyhow. It's not build or buy. It's really build and buy. It's just a question of what pieces you're going to build, because some of it you have no choice, like your connections to existing systems, and some of it you do have a choice. So optimize the use of your IT resources and understand the scope before you get into it.
Well, I think you just provided us a great segue into our closing here, David. We do have some resources available for you if you'd like to read a little bit more about this topic. Hopefully we answered most of your questions, but maybe a little ambitious to answer all of your questions. So if you do have more, please feel free to download our joint white paper that we just released with David on build or buy your CDP and choosing the approach that's best for your business. And if you're in the retail industry, we actually have a little live demo coming up on October 14th. So please feel free to join us for that as well if you're interested in taking a little bit deeper dive into Telium. But other than that, thank you for joining us. Thank you to everyone on our panel. Thank you to Audrey for kicking us off at the start there. That was a great talk. And if you do have any questions, please feel free to reach out to us after. Otherwise, we'll see you in the next Telium webinar. Thank you, everyone.